If a player cleans his ball during play of a hole, except on the putting green, he shall incur a penalty of 1 stroke. That's the rule, Jerry.
But it's just a friendly game. Why do you always have to be such a stickler?
Because that's the way I was raised.
Welcome to Spirit of the Game, brought to you by the Colorado Golf Association. Here are your hosts, Ed Mate and Lewis Harry.
Okay, welcome back to Spirit of the Game, CGA's Rules podcast with Lewis Harry.
And Ed Mate.
A little weird leading off here, usually the one to kind of open the podcast. So.
This is all about you today. This is about, you're the guy who spent, you ever figured out exactly how many hours you spend on a golf course annually? Like the number of hours?
Well, I mean, our activity tracker probably does a good job of showing that, but yeah, I mean, who knows? It's higher than I can count.
Yeah. So that's where the fun happens. That's where the action is. I'm sitting here in the office most of the time while you're out there making rulings, or at least in a position to make rulings. It is amazing to me, how little time we actually spend conducting tournaments dealing with the rules of golf, specifically, like in the book with a decision or an interpretation and having to, come to a conclusion and what we're actually doing when we're out there, which is everything but.
Yeah, it's interesting because we spend so much time studying it, devoting, learning that knowledge, trying to figure out, what all the intricacies of the rules, and then it occupies such a small amount of time running a golf tournament.
Yeah.
But when that moment comes up, that's kind of when you snap into it and
that's when the fun starts.
Action, so.
Exactly. So today we're going to recap kind of some highlights or some ones that stood out for you this year. So,
we had a couple. Of course, there's a lot of opportunity within end of April, start of May to the start of October. A lot of stuff happens between that time period. So, we had a couple. Picked out 5 that were really notable this year.
So before you get to your list, just because not everybody listening plays in our tournaments, one of the things we started doing, it's now been quite a while, we list a phone number on the scorecard, and that's your cell phone or Kate's cell phone, whoever the tournament director is, with any rules questions. It used to be that we would just say, please play 2 balls if you have a doubtful situation arise. Now we just say, call that number. On a given tournament, how many times does that phone ring with a question?
I think it depends on what the tournament is. If it's a one-day CGA qualifier, it could ring anywhere from 2 to 10 times, depending on the quality of player we have in the field. I think is a big contributor to that. How much we get calls for rules, but if it's a match play tournament, we could go 4 days without hearing anyone call in because it's match play. You and your opponent have to figure it out.
Yeah.
So we still do put the procedure for playing 2 golf balls on the back of our stroke play scorecards, Rule 20.1C3. So it's still there if a player actually reads that far down the back of their scorecard.
Which they don't. So when you do get a call, are you usually able to resolve it right over the phone? Or is it sometimes require, I'll tell you what, play a second ball and I'll have to deal with it later?
I think for a lot of standard stuff, we can figure it out. We can walk through it over the phone.
Yeah.
If it's a simple dropping from a penalty area procedure, or if they just have a question about, hey, my golf ball moved or something like that, we can figure it out over the phone. Now, there's times where a player says, hey, I would rather someone come over here and check this out. Then it's kind of, hey, we need to get someone in that area.
Right. Well, I think it's been a great modernization of our procedures. It's really helped a lot, and I think has hopefully helped our pace of play. So of those calls, we got a few that maybe didn't start out as a phone call, but at least ended up on your list.
Well, there was a couple. Like I said, I picked out 5 that were notable. And when I say notable, they're either notable for what the rule was, maybe it's something that just doesn't come up often, or it was notable because it had implications on what happened to that player.
Right.
Which in 2 of these cases, that's what we'll see. So, we'll go ahead and go down the list.
And by the way, the names have either been redacted or changed to protect the innocent or to protect the guilty, I guess.
This is in no particular order of severe to whatever. But
will these players, if they were listening, know that they'll know Oh yeah, that was
I
me.
think if someone is interested enough to do the research into each of these events, they possibly could figure out.
Okay, who the player was.
They could track the breadcrumbs back to where
Okay,
it was.
very good. There's a challenge for you.
Yeah, if you're so interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So our first one happened early in the year, Walnut Creek U.S. Open local qualifier. This was on May 11th.
Okay.
Possibly the wettest day of the
Oh
2023
yes.
season.
Oh yes. Now I remember. And cold.
Cold, wet.
And you had a suspension for unplayable conditions and squeegeeing, or it wasn't. Yeah.
We never had a suspension for dangerous play. The greens ended up flooding at one point, suspended for an unplayable golf course. Got squeegees out. Actually, I went out there with myself with a flipped bunker rake to squeegee greens and tees.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have enough squeegees to go around, so I just took a bunker rake, flipped it around, squeegee the green that way. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very wet, soggy day, cold, never stopped raining. If anyone plays Common Ground, you'll note this was the start of Common Ground being underwater for
A couple weeks.
13, 14 days, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So May 11th, Walnut Creek U.S. Open qualifier. Player approaches one of our field members on his third or fourth hole, asks a question about an equipment question. Had played 3 or 4 holes to this point, started on 10. I think they approached one of our rules officials out on 13 or 14, whatever this was. But I had a question about the status of something on his driver. Now, I didn't get a lot of information from our, over the phone originally, or over the radio, I should say. And when I approached this player, I asked him, hey, heard you had a question about your driver. Pulls the head cover off his driver, shows me the face, and lo and behold, there's 3 white dots sitting on the face of his driver. And if anyone's been around golf in the last 10 years, you would probably instantly recognize what these dots are. And what they are, if you don't know what I'm referring to, is they're reflective adhesive dots placed on a driver face so a launch monitor is able to pick up that club. So you can gather data from a launch monitor. Unfortunately for this player, leaving those dots on the face of that driver presents quite a bit of an issue if you make a stroke with that club in a round. Now, just having the dots on the face isn't the issue in itself because you can carry a club with those dots on there. When you make a stroke with those dots on the face, that's when our issue pops up. So ask the player, hey, have you used this club in this round? He said, yes, I've used it on every hole I've played so far.
Does that count?
And unfortunately for this player, that resulted in a disqualification. With those dots being on the face of the driver, turns that driver into a non-conforming club, unfortunately. It's a breach of, you'd actually have to dive into the equipment rules to figure this out. Once you dive into the equipment rules, you'll note that attachments to the club face are not permitted, thus turning that club into a non-conforming club. Stroke with a non-conforming club, unfortunately, is a DQ.
So you said attachments to the face, to the head of the club is a non-conforming. If it was just a black Sharpie mark that he put there to remind him of something, is that also, would that qualify, or is it actually like it's a label of some sort, so it actually has dimensions?
Well, it's really anything that the face. If you want to think of the club head, you can do certain things to the club head. As we all know, lead tape is a common attachment, if we want to call it an attachment to a club head. The face of the club, however, is kind of a no-go zone. We have to leave that face alone. If you remember, Hideki Matsuyama got in trouble with some paint fill on a 3-wood.
I remember that.
And that's kind of the same.
Was he disqualified?
He was disqualified for that one. Yep.
Yeah. So did you know immediately that was a DQ?
As soon as I saw the dots on the face, and as soon as I confirmed with the player that club had been used to make a stroke. Actually, I think what I told him was, I got good news and bad news for you. The good news is you're going to get out of the rain. The bad news is you're going to be disqualified.
How did he react?
He seemed to be a bit bummed.
Yeah.
It's a purely self-inflicted penalty, and it's a matter of just really not understanding what you can and can't do.
So if I'm listening to this, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. The guy had dots on the face of his club and he's disqualified. That seems like a death penalty for jaywalking. What? No harm, no foul. That's silly. That's why the rules are stupid. And but you can, I'm sure, appreciate somebody who brought that. So, what would be your answer to that criticism?
Well, again, it goes back to the face is, and this kind of goes along with blurred lines a little bit. And I hate to leak this over into the what is not a divot conversation, but when we talk about attaching things or putting things on the face of a club, it's done with the intention to limit what can be done to influence the flight of the golf ball. And you could make the argument that a half centimeter dot way out on the toe has nothing to do to influence the flight of the golf ball, but it's easier for the governing bodies just to draw the line of nothing on the face, right? We're not going to get into the gray areas of, well, can this influence the flight of a golf ball off the face? Can this not influence it? So it's really about just drawing a clear, distinct line about, hey, we're not going to, the face is off limits. You can't attach anything. You can't put anything on there. You got to leave the face alone. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I like that clarification or that emphasis on the face. Kind of reminds me of you're allowed to repair your line of putt now. You're allowed to repair damage. You're allowed to repair ball marks and all these things. But you really should be careful when you get to the hole, because when you start messing with the circumference of the hole, now you're really touching something you shouldn't be touching. So I like that distinction, because I just think of it more as the head itself rather than the face. So I think that helps me understand a little bit better why that's so sacred. I know that the markings of a driver face are in the grooves on the club. I mean, those are something that's legislated in a very meticulous way. So anything that alters them or messes with them, other than through wear, normal use, but that makes sense. So I liked your answer, though. It's probably I had a similar situation, disqualified. Well, I didn't disqualify him. I wish I had, or I wish I could have. I wish his breach warranted it. Got a 4-stroke penalty at Lake Valley in a player ability test on a day where the wind was blowing 70 miles an hour. And it was almost, I'm exaggerating, it wasn't 70, but it was pretty awful. And nobody qualified that day. And I wish I would have been able to say, the bad news is you're disqualified. The good news is you're out of the wind. So, all right, what's next?
Okay, so next it would be, we're going to match play at this point. Our super senior match play. We had a situation, and this reminded me very, very similar to a situation that happened at the U.S. Amateur Bandon Dunes. Was that 2019, 20, somewhere in there? A couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't know.
I don't have them memorized. It's okay.
I don't either. But
I do know the ones that were at Cherry Hills. Those ones I remember.
So it reminded me of a situation at the U.S. Amateur Bandon, and we'll throw the clock back here for a second. At that U.S. Amateur, there was a situation where...
Just to be clear, is this pre-2019 or post-2019? That's important.
This is post-2019.
So
that's what I said. It was either 19 or 20.
Okay.
Whatever
Okay.
US
So the new
Amateur
rules,
that was.
quote unquote, are in effect. Okay.
The rules we're using today
Yeah.
apply to this situation.
Okay.
But a player is using a club caddy. Last hole of the match is tied. And club caddy hops in the bunker, reaches down,
Oh, yeah, I remember this now.
grabs some sand, runs it through his fingers,
Yep.
and then tosses it aside.
Yeah.
So unfortunately,
Yeah.
the caddy acting in this situation is be treated as if the player did it themselves.
Right.
Testing the sand, breach of Rule 12. Gonna
Right.
get a loss of hole penalty. The match was tied at that point. Player loses the 18th hole
Mm-hmm.
on something, really, really kind of inexcusable
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. But anyways, the only reason I bring that up is because in this situation, we had a match in our super senior match play. Match was tied, 18th hole. So pretty pivotal point in the match. One of the by the way, this was at Willis Case golf course in Denver, one of the city of Denver courses. If anyone knows the 18th hole at Willis Case,
Uphill par 4.
uphill par 4, very easy to go left in the rough off that tee. So player over there looking left rough, finds a ball, thinks it's theirs, hits that ball, gets on the green, thinks they're in a really good position to possibly have a chance to win this match. gets up to the green, is about to mark their ball, marks it, lifts it, realizes that wasn't their ball they just hit.
Now, what round was that in? That wasn't the final. That's not how the match was decided.
No, this was day 3 of pod play.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm struggling to remember if that match really affected how the pod shook out.
Right.
It might have. I think it did, if I remember right. But anyways, day 3 pod play. Player gets up there, realizes it was not their ball they just hit on the 18th hole. They've just hit a wrong ball.
Right.
Unfortunately, in match play, there's no correcting that mistake.
Right.
Once you make the mistake, you kind of pass the point of
The only thing
no return.
it's interesting. A couple things come to mind to me on this one. One is if we're both playing and we exchange balls, and let's say you hit my ball and I hit your ball, is it the player who hit the ball first who loses the hole? I would assume.
If
We both hit wrong balls, without a doubt.
If you know,
and we know for sure because I drove it 50 yards past you, or I don't know why you'd be confused, and I would never drive it 50 yards past you, but bear with me. If we know for a fact that one of the two players played the wrong ball first, they would be
would be the player.
Loss a hole is right there.
Yep, that would be the player who loses the hole. However, if two players discover that they have both hit a wrong ball, but they cannot figure out which occurrence happened first. Maybe they were just completely opposite sides of the fairway. No, they don't know who or where it happened or where the balls got switched or whatever the case is. Then there's no penalty to either player, and they play the hole out with the balls switched.
Right. I remember that used to be a decision on that. Yep. Another thing that comes to mind on this one to me is in match play there are really 3 types of penalties, and I'm probably overly simplifying this. Number 1, a one-stroke penalty. That applies to both match and stroke play, right? Then you have the general penalty, which in match play is loss of hole. And then you have adjustment of hole penalties. And sometimes I think people confuse loss of hole with adjustment of hole. So let's say you and I are playing a match, and I won't go to 18 because it'll make it too complicated, but I discover on the 3rd hole that I've got 15 clubs. I don't lose the hole in that moment. You play hard. So if I discover that in the middle of the 3rd hole, as opposed to hitting a wrong ball in the middle of the 3rd hole, we might as well just go to the 4th tee because that hole is over. I still have something to play for with that 15th club in my bag. I need to declare it out of play, otherwise I get disqualified. But my point is sometimes we'll call that a play hard situation because you still have a reason. That hole could still very much matter. And then once we finish that hole, then we make the adjustments and apply the penalty stroke. So I think sometimes that's confused when people say, I've got 15 clubs, so I lose the hole. No, we're going to wait and see how this hole turns out, and then we're going to make the appropriate adjustments. That's a penalty clause. It's it's very difficult to explain to people. I don't know why it's so difficult, but anyway, it just always struck me as drawing that contrast between those two situations.
It's also the only adjustment penalty still left.
That's it. Too many clubs. Yeah, there used to be.
That's the
other one. The other one was one ball. The one ball rule. There's that still left. Where if I play is that an adjustment? 2 caddies. Those are the others that having more than one caddy.
That one. Well, having more than one caddy is just general penalty for every hole it's occurred on, and unlike having 15 or more than 14 clubs in your bag, which is limited to 2 holes. Having more than one caddy is not limited, unfortunately. So you could have a situation where you have a 36-stroke penalty.
Yeah, that would be tough. That's like putting the total of the front 9 in the 9th box, 36 on hole number 9, and you have to live with it.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay, that's a good one. What else?
So next one, Colorado Open. We're kind of halfway through the season here at this point. Colorado Open.
I was thinking the Colorado Open is kind of the top of the crescendo. That's like the very middle of the season. I know it's not really true because we have so much going on in September and October, but it feels like it's the middle of the season. But easy for me to say. Remember, I'm in the office. You're out there writing these tournaments.
However you look at it. So Colorado Open, this year marked the return to walking in the Colorado Open. So keep in mind, Model Local Rule G6 is in effect for this championship, prohibition of motorized transportation. However, we do in the Colorado Open have some carve-outs with model local rule G6 that there's a couple situations where if a player uses motorized transportation, the committee's going to allow that. So good example would be we have a shuttle between holes 9 green and 10T. It's a longer walk. And there's a shuttle available. So if a player uses that transportation between those two spots, the committee's going to say it's okay. There's no breach of that model local rule for using motorized transportation in that scenario. Another part of that model local rule is anytime a player is operating under stroke and distance, they can get a ride back to where they have already been. So that's another little carve out with that model local rule. Any other situation, it would have to be left up to the committee to decide if that would have been a approved little mode of transportation there. Anyways, so round 2, we have a player who alerts us on it's like 9 going, when they're making their turn, whatever turn they were making, 18 to 1, 9 to 10, whatever they were doing. And they said that, hey, we have a question about a caddy a couple holes ago. I guess this caddy was having some, maybe getting tired, leg was hurting, ankle was hurting, whatever the case was. Wanted to give his ankle a break for a hole. Decides to hop on a cart with a spectator. And right up that hole, player's going to hoof their own bag from tee to green. And then, caddy gets the ride from the tee to the green, hops out, resumes his caddy duties from there.
Okay.
And
Seems pretty innocent to me. Okay, his ankle hurt. Come on. It's not him. He's caddying. Just giving the caddy a little rest. How does the player benefit from that?
as is always the case, it's the rules aren't the complicated part of this. It's the facts that are complicated. So we need to get some more information from this player. So the first question was, where did this occur? Sounded like it occurred from the tee of, let's just call it hole 7. I don't remember what hole it's on. Let's call it hole 7. Hopped in the cart at the tee at hole 7 and went back to carrying the bag after the completion of hole 7. Okay. Well, let's get some more information. Did he stop being your caddy during the play at hole 7? Well, he gave me, we talked through a shot out in the fairway for my second shot, and he said, let's take this line here. Let's hit this club. Well, that doesn't sound like he ceased his caddy duties for that hole. It sounds like he was still acting as your caddy for the play of hole 7. Okay, now, what happened next? Okay, well, we hit our second shot. He got back in the cart, got his ride up to the green. I hoofed my bag up to the green. And when he got to the green, we talking through it, looking at our putt, getting our read.
Clean my golf ball.
And then after that, from hole 7 to hole 8, he got the bag and we resumed what we were doing for the previous 6 holes. Okay, well, it sounds like we may probably have a breach here of our model local rule. Or anytime that a caddy is acting in certain ways, that's going to be treated as if the player acted in that way as well, or took that action for the player. And it sounds like your caddy used motorized transportation in a situation where we probably would not have permitted him to do that.
Right.
So as I was talking to this player, it sounds like kind of told him that exact same thing. Said this appears to me as if you're going to have a 2-stroke penalty on hole 7. That's the hole it took place on. We're going to add a 2-stroke penalty to hole number 7. So, okay, that's great, fine. Deal with that. At the end of the round, player comes in looking at the leaderboard at the end of the day, and lo and behold, that player misses the cut by 1 stroke.
Yeah. Ouch. That hurts.
So
yeah.
It's probably and again, it goes back to just like you were alluding to. What advantage did that player get by his caddy riding in a cart?
I guess to kind of take a page out of your book, you could say, I got some good news and some bad news. I got good news, and bad news. The bad news is you got 2. The other bad news is you missed the cut by 1. But here's the good news. You didn't have a second caddy during play of that hole. You didn't have another friend carry the bag while your caddy rode in the cart, and both of them were helping you with reading putts. Then you have 2 caddies on that hole, and it would have been a 4-stroke penalty, right?
I think it still would be a 2-stroke penalty in that scenario. I think you're going to get a quantity discount.
Oh, really?
In this scenario. You're going to
Okay.
get a 1.C34 discount.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Unless there was a intervening event between the two things happening,
Okay.
where we have
There
either
you go.
knowledge of the 2 breaches and then continuing on,
Yeah.
or a stroke was made in between knowing of the 2 breaches.
Okay, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
I think in that case, he would have got the 2
Just
plus
total of 2.
the 2 plus 2 equals 2. In
Okay.
that case.
The other thing that comes to mind, and I do remember the player, and it's far enough removed now I can name the player, Matt Scovey, a very talented young player, played, I believe, at SMU. Same type of situation, model local rule prohibiting automotive transportation, realized on a hole that his rangefinder had been left behind. His father was caddying for him, and he said to a rules official, can you, and I think it was a rules, maybe it was a marshal, but can you run me back to hole 4, or whatever hole it was, and see if I can find the rangefinder, the distance device, and he did. And we ended up penalizing the player because it wasn't authorized. It was not a rules official. I felt terrible about it, and it ended up costing Matt Scovey the low amateur medal for the Colorado Open. So, again, that one was even harder to swallow because he was just, it wouldn't even. And he was sort of, it actually hurt him because his caddy, maybe it helped him. Dads are very rarely good caddies, but anyway.
See, in that scenario, and I'll argue that, I think in that scenario, I think you could argue that might be something the committee should
Waive or authorize, yeah.
Solely because, and the only reason I say this is because when you have that model local rule in place, G6, for prohibiting motorized transportation, when you have that model local rule in place, you're essentially applying to your competition that walking is an integral part of your competition, right? You must walk the golf course. And in that scenario where a player or a caddy is going back because they forgot something or whatever the case is, they're going backwards, I could argue that they've already covered that distance walking.
Yeah.
They've already walked that distance
Yeah.
in that portion of the golf course.
Right.
So because they've already walked it, I think there's an argument that could be made.
I think
there's
that's
an argument
sound,
there.
common sense thinking. I think that because, again, what I like about that approach is it addresses why. Why do we have a walking only clause? Because it's part of the competition, and you have to navigate the entire golf course on foot. So your answer there, while it's also player friendly and a much easier, frankly, it feels pretty unfair, quite frankly. It felt unfair at the time, and I don't know if the rules, and that was going back, pre-2019. So I don't know if that model local rule has been adjusted, modified, or otherwise. But at the time, we felt like we didn't have any other choice, which is always tough. But believe me, if anybody in that discussion had seen a way out, we would have clung to it, I think. So if Matt's listening, he's like, man, I wish Lewis Harry were around then. Okay, what do we got next?
Coming down to later part of the year here, U.S. Amateur.
Okay.
We're getting out of the CGA.
The actual amateur, not the qualifier.
The actual
big deal, the show.
U.S.
Okay.
Amateur, Cherry Hills and Colorado Golf Club. This particular one comes from Stroke Play at Colorado Golf Club. So I was, this was day 2 of Stroke Play. So we're getting down to the end here before we make the cut to match play. I was if anyone's familiar with Colorado Golf Club, I was mostly roving the front 9 that day. So my typical loop that day was between 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Okay.
That was kind of my typical. I would kind of just rove in that area, just to bounce because we had a checkpoint at 7, and that was a good place for me to get to if I needed to go time a group for
Pace of play.
pace of play.
Right.
And if there was a group that was coming off the checkpoint at 3, I could jump to 5 and pick that group up to get them to the next checkpoint. So it just gives you an idea of why I was in the area.
Right.
So anyways, I was at number 8, just watching groups. There was nothing really going on. This was mid-morning, so there was nothing too crazy going on the golf course yet. Group comes to 8. One of the players in the group. Everyone else tried to drive the green at 8, short uphill par 4. One of the players lays back, has a wedge in his hand. Ends up flying the green with a wedge, and then as they get up there, I see them call me up to the green. It looks like they have a question. So if you're familiar with 8 at Colorado Golf Club, it's kind of a 2-tiered green. There's a back shelf in the back left corner, but then there's a bunker back right of the green.
Where was the hole that day?
Back middle right.
Oh, so they didn't put it on that back left.
No, we opted not to use the shelf just solely for pace of play.
Right.
Especially just in the stroke play rounds.
Yeah.
But anyways, back right of the green, there's a bunker. So and they're over by the bunker. So I'm like, okay, it looks like this is probably gonna be something in the bunker or whatever the case is. So I get up there and the player says, I have a question about an embedded ball. It's like, well, now my mind starts jogging a little bit. This is going to be an embedded ball in the face of the bunker. Is this going to be embedded in sand? Let's take a look at this embedded ball. So we look at it, and immediately it's very distinguishable about where the edge of the bunker is, where the edge of the prepared area of sand starts and stops with this bunker. It's very, very clear.
Yeah.
And that player's ball is just outside of that prepared edge, not in the bunker. So his ball's in the general area. However, it's embedded in sand. So before you get back to the grass in this scenario, in this case, there's just some very, very, very patchy sand that's outside that area of prepared sand.
Was the sand the ball was embedded in the general area sand that had been deposited there by people playing out of the, or is it sort of the nature of the soil?
It's just I think it's just the nature.
That's more of a curiosity question. It's neither here nor there, I guess. But
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's some of the soil from just the ground in general, and I think it's just sand that's come out of the bunker and spilled on top. But regardless, it's not. It was pretty clear that this ball is in the general area. So, I kind of started explaining to him, one, your ball is not in the bunker. We're in the general area right now. We can kind of clearly see this is where our bunker starts and stops. So the player's like, okay, I get that. And now I go into the explanation of why this player is not going to get relief for an embedded ball. So the way the embedded ball rule operates is that typically anywhere in the general area, a player is going to get relief if their ball meets the definition of being embedded. So we have two exceptions to that rule. The first exception is that if their ball's embedded, but it's embedded in an area where the stroke would be unreasonable. If regardless of the embedded nature or not, we're not going to give you relief.
Right.
We're not going to bail you out of jail from a bad situation.
Right, and that same principle applies in other rules as well.
Correct. It applies in immovable obstructions,
unplayable,
any abnormal course conditions. That's where it applies.
I shouldn't say. Yeah. Okay.
So I told him, I was like, well, so that's the first exception to this rule. Really had nothing to do with the situation. I was just going through the education with this player. So the second exception is we're not going to give relief for balls embedded in sand that is in an area not cut to fairway height or less. So where this really comes into play, and I think it's the picture they actually use in a lot of the USGA's rules education for this topic, is they use a picture from Pinehurst number 2. And if anyone knows Pinehurst number 2, sandy areas all over the golf course that are just off the fairway with, wispy grass in the sandy areas. And these are areas where the sand or the grass surrounding these areas is clearly not cut to a fairway height. And we're not going to give you relief from that sandy areas for an embedded ball because, your ball is probably not in a good spot to begin with, right? So that's what we had here. The surrounding part of this bunker was rough, long of the green. The player would have been in rough had a bunker not been there. And the ball's embedded in sand in the general area. So we meet those two pieces of that puzzle for that exception to the embedded ball rule.
So no relief for you.
No relief, but I did tell the player, since you're in the general area, you're free to ground your club. And, it's just like you were in the rough. So, however you're going to play the shot, even though you're in sand,
go for it.
You can ground your club and you can.
First of all, on that very point, the for those of us that are rules geeks, the famous book by Richard Tufts, The Principles Behind the Rules of Golf. This stood out to me when I read the book for the first time, that he makes the statement that in this exact situation, it is just as much of a penalty to ground your club in what he would have said it through the green in a ball where a ball is lying in sand as it is to do it in a bunker. In other words, the principle is more important than the letter of the law. The principle is, why can't you ground your club in sand? What's the reason? Well, the reason is you're going to improve the lie. You're going to alter the lie. Sand is it's going to change it, as opposed to grass, which is going to spring right back. It doesn't change the principle of playing the ball as it lies, of course, as you find it. And that really stuck with me. I don't think what you told the player is consistent with that, which is, you're correct, by the way. You can ground your club. And I think, because my question, if you really wanted to put a microscope on that situation, when he puts that club behind the ball, has he gained an advantage? Has he altered the lie of the ball in any way, shape, or form? And again, that's debatable. But the same would be said for people who ground their club very lightly in a bunker. Are they really, as a practical matter, by the time they're done playing the stroke, they're going to eradicate all that sand around the ball. That little indentation made by the sole of that sand wedge is going to have no bearing whatsoever on the actual playing of the stroke. You know, during the modernization in 2019, there was some discussion about eliminating the grounding of a club or just not allowing you to ground clubs in bunkers and to take practice strokes. And the reason that was decided not to be a good idea, the practice strokes would have ended up with even more sand deposited on. What a mess. But it also, I think, concluded rightly that you're really altering that principle, playing the ball as it lies. So that's probably the main point is that I'll ask you, why is it that I can't get relief from a ball embedded in a sandy area in the general area that's not closely mown? What's the reason?
Well, I mean, other than just that's because that's the way the rule's written. That's the primary reason. But yeah, and I don't know if I have a really great answer for this. I think it's just one of those things where I guess it's just because it's something that's just completely different than being embedded elsewhere in the general area.
And it's
I think elsewhere in the general area, you have some consistencies, whether it's fairway rough. I think you can find some consistencies elsewhere in the general area where the ball's embedded. I think just because sand, not in an area of being closely mown, I think that's just such an outlier that we're just going to throw it out.
But again, courses like you mentioned, Pinehurst number 2, that condition is so pervasive everywhere. Every time a ball lands in that area, it's going to embed, as opposed to most golf courses where it's very rare that a ball is going to embed. So you're going to be giving embedded ball relief all day long.
Right.
And you're effectively letting players tee up the ball every time they hit a really wild shot because of the sandiness of the soil. I don't know. I'm sure it's been thought out well. Okay. Sure. So we have we like to keep these to about 40 minutes. So we're running up. I think you have one more.
There's one more finishing off the year, and this one's a short one, so we'll make our time here. But it's a short one. End of the year, CGA Mid-Am up in Steamboat at Haymaker. Great golf course.
Thank you, Haymaker.
Thank you to Haymaker for hosting us this year.
Thank you to all of our member clubs who were so graciously open their doors to us so we can continue to conduct state championships. So,
but a couple, I actually had two of the same situation, back-to-back days, two different players. So
okay.
Read into that what you will. But simple ball search, player begins searching for their ball. Tick, 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 tick. Time's going by. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. Ball's not found. Wait, 5 seconds later, hey, I got a ball over here. Or, hey, I got my ball now. Looks like it was on the other side of this hill. Well, unfortunately, the time doesn't read 3 minutes and 0.0001 seconds. The 3 minutes is a hard and fast number, and that ball has now changed statuses. It's no longer the ball in play. It's now a wrong ball. So there's, I think, some misunderstanding about, and not so much, I guess, a misunderstanding from players' ends, but I think players really have a hard time wrapping around that 3 minutes is 3 minutes and 0, 0, 0, 0,
Right.
0, 0 to infinity seconds. That's where
Yeah.
and there's some, I don't know. I just think that players think there's some
It's
some,
kind of
some leeway.
Well,
there.
I think common sense is, are you really late when you walk into a room 20 seconds after the meeting started? Yeah, it's close enough. So I just think it's part of the casualness of the way we treat time. And this is a soapbox of mine. First of all, as a rules official, I make it a practice to always announce 1 minute. We got 30 seconds, and then I count down as loud as I can. We got to count down from 10. So, and as soon as I get to 0, I say, ball's lost. And people still look. They don't just immediately abandon. Yeah. They're every time. I'm like, and I usually have to say, guys, the ball's lost, to really make it a point, because I don't want that ball to be found now. I really don't, because now you're in exactly the situation you're in. You're going to have to be the bad guy that says, sorry, time's up. Yep. So the more clear you can make it that time is being watched and monitored and counted, the better you're going to be if that exact thing happens. The other thing is soapbox warning. Nobody times ball searches except for rules officials. That's the only person you'll ever see timing a ball search is a rules official. So when I've played in tournaments, and I'm not saying this because I'm holier than thou, it's because I'm such a vigilant about pace of play. The reason we changed 5 to 3 was for pace of play. So what good does it do us if nobody's timing it? So that's just always been annoying, and I wish we could do some things with the rules app, or even just not even the rules app doesn't get looked at, but when you're using a live scoring event and you have an app to enter scores, put a timer on there so it's right there in front of you. So, well, speaking of timing, I think we went a minute over. We lost that ball a minute ago. Great year. Thank you, Lewis, for all the work you, Kate, Brent, the entire rules and comps team. You guys work your butts off, all because you love the game, and it's really important. The CGA was founded in 1915, and we're still continuing that tradition. So without you doing it, we wouldn't have much fun. And if we didn't have rules, we wouldn't be able to crown a champion with any confidence we got the right person right.
That's right.
All right. Until next month.
We'll see you then.
See you then.